Hi, my name is Kaylin. That's not how my sister Jade introduced me last Saturday night. To a room full of her friends, colleagues, and a man I'd only met for the first time, her boyfriend. She gestured toward me with a glass of champagne in hand and said, laughing, "That's my weird little sister, the one who collects dead flowers and talks to stray cats." The entire group erupted in polite laughter. Brandon, her boyfriend, blinked in confusion, like he didn't quite understand the joke, but still chuckled along, because that's what people do when Jade speaks. And me? I smiled. The kind of smile that you put on when you're suddenly naked under a spotlight, and everyone pretends you agreed to be there. The rooftop bar was buzzing with soft jazz and clinking glasses, fairy lights strung like constellations across the black Manhattan sky. Everyone looked like they belonged. Loafers polished, lipstick precise. And then there was me, Kaylin, wearing a black thrift store dress and holding a non-alcoholic drink because someone had to drive home. I hadn't wanted to come. Jade had begged. "No one's going to remember you if you don't show up to these things," she'd said over the phone. "You can't stay a recluse forever." But apparently, being remembered meant being reduced. Brandon was tall, soft-spoken, the kind of guy who notices details, like how my smile didn't quite reach my eyes after Jade's little joke. After the introductions, he approached me at the bar, his voice low. "So, Kaylin," he said, "your last name isn't Montgomery?" I shook my head, slightly puzzled. "No, it's Elwood." He tilted his head. "That's weird. Jade never mentioned." Of course she hadn't. I left the rooftop early, not dramatically. No flinging of drinks or sharp words. Just a quiet thanks for the invite and a wave to the crowd who wouldn't remember me anyway. But Brandon's confusion stuck in my head, like a breadcrumb left on purpose. Why did he think I had the same last name as her? Why was he surprised? I got into my car, pulled into traffic, and for the next 20 minutes drove in complete silence except for the voice in my head, one I hadn't heard in a long time. "You're not really part of her world. You're something she hides." When I was 8, Jade told me I was adopted. She wasn't. But it was her favorite story to tell whenever I made the mistake of asking why we looked nothing alike, why I got different birthday gifts, why I never saw my own baby pictures in the living room. "You're the side project," she'd say, like an extra credit assignment Mom forgot to submit. I used to laugh, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't, I knew I'd cry. And in our house, crying was weakness. Jade taught me that early. Mom never corrected her. In fact, she'd just sip wine and look away. Years passed. I became quiet, invisible. Jade became the one with framed school awards and a solo in the senior musical. I became her weird little sister, long before the rooftop joke. I texted her that night. Was that joke really necessary? She didn't reply. But the next morning, I woke to a notification. Brandon had sent me a friend request. Attached to it was a message. "I think there's more to your story than she tells people. Want to talk sometime?" My stomach twisted. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't invasive. It felt precise. Like someone had finally seen through the fog and noticed I was there. That afternoon, I pulled an old box out from under my bed. It was covered in dust, its corners worn. Inside, hospital bracelets, a few photographs, a letter my grandmother had written me before she passed, and a faded family tree drawn in my own childish handwriting. One branch was blank. Jade's name filled the other. For years I'd believed that meant I wasn't part of the tree. Now I started to wonder, what if I was the root? The next time I saw Jade was at brunch. She was radiant as always, wearing that buttery yellow dress she saves for press photos and dates. I showed up in jeans and a ponytail. She greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek and didn't mention the rooftop night. Instead, she launched into updates about her firm, her Pilates instructor, her upcoming trip to Portugal with Brandon. I sat, nodded, and stirred my coffee in silence. Then she said something that made the room still. "You really should stop hanging around Brandon. He's got a soft heart. I'd hate for you to make him pity you." I blinked. Excuse me? She sipped her mimosa and smiled sweetly. Don't take it the wrong way. You just have this trauma energy. You draw in people who want to fix things. I said nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked her dead in the eye and asked, "Did you ever think it's not trauma I carry, but truth?" Her smile faltered. I left the brunch early too. Only this time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt loaded, not angry, not even hurt, just ready. Ready to look back. Ready to remember. Ready to find out how I'd become the side note in a story I was born into, because something was off. Brandon was right. My last name wasn't a typo. And Jade had spent years writing a version of reality where I was either comic relief or completely erased. But I had pages she'd never seen, and it was time to flip them. It started with the closet door. Not metaphorical, an actual door. White, hollow core, the kind every American suburb seems to have in its bedrooms. Mine stuck when it was humid. I had to yank it hard enough that the house sighed. That afternoon, it opened with a hollow crack, and out tumbled a forgotten stack of notebooks I'd shoved behind a shoebox labeled camp stuff. There it was again, proof that even when I tried to forget, something in me refused. Inside the notebooks, old diary entries, sketches, notes to a father I never met, and one page that stopped my breath cold. Drawn in crayon, purple and green, a family tree with 3 names: Grandma Elwood, Mom, Kaylin. There was no mention of Jade. I stared at it, sitting cross-legged on the carpet still the same muted blue since I was 10. I don't remember drawing that tree, but I do remember the day I tore it out and rewrote it. Added Dad at the top. Jade right beside me. I even circled her name with hearts. My therapist once called it adaptive behavior. I called it surviving. The next few days after the rooftop incident, Jade didn't text. I didn't expect her to, but Brandon did. "That brunch was brutal. You okay?" She's different when she talks about you. Sharper, less polished. "Did something happen when you were kids?" That last message stayed unread for hours. I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain emotional vandalism? Jade never hit me. She never screamed. But she sliced with elegance. Like the time I won a local poetry contest in high school, and she read my poem aloud at dinner, mocking the metaphors in a baby voice until Mom told her to stop. Not because it hurt me, but because the salmon was getting cold. Or the day my acceptance letter to NYU came, and Jade accidentally spilled iced coffee on it, then laughed it off with, "Oops, I guess even your dreams can't handle pressure." I met Brandon again at a bookstore in Brooklyn. Neutral ground. He looked tired. Good tired. Like he'd been asking real questions and wasn't sleeping on easy answers anymore. "I did some digging," he said over his Americano. "You're not on any of Jade's social media, not even tagged in family photos." I nodded. "I'm the Easter egg. You have to look closely." He hesitated, then, slowly, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I hope this isn't overstepping. I found this online." It was a legal article, small, obscure, something about trust revision cases in New York. "The Elwood name came up," he said. "Some kind of property inheritance dispute filed by your grandmother before she passed?" My hands went cold. My grandmother, my real grandmother, had left me her house, the brownstone on Elgin Street. She passed when I was 17. I remembered the funeral, how Jade wore white and cried louder than everyone, and I remembered the letter Grandma left me. I'd been too young to understand it, full of rights to ownership and escrow release. Mom said not to worry, it was handled. Apparently, handled meant disappeared. That night, I dug through the basement. Past boxes of holiday lights and old linens, I found it. My grandmother's envelope, still sealed. Inside, handwritten on thick cream paper, "To my Kaylin, who sees truth in silence." It outlined in full that I was the legal heir of her house, that the trust would transfer when I turned 25. I wasn't 25 yet, but somehow, Jade had been living there, renovating it, hosting influencer brunches, and decorating with photos where my face never appeared. It clicked all at once. Jade had intercepted the documents. She had manipulated Mom into silence. And she'd made me believe I was just lucky to be invited at all. The next day, I called my old mentor, Miss Horvath. She had been my English teacher, the only adult who ever saw Jade for what she was. "Kaylin," she said, her voice warm as sunlight. "It's been years. What's going on? Did I ever tell you about my grandmother's will?" A pause. Then, "You mean how your sister tried to claim she was the eldest heir, even though she wasn't related?" I froze. "You knew?" "I tried telling your mom," she said gently. "She brushed me off. Said family matters are family matters. You were so fragile then, I didn't want to push." I hung up the phone with shaking fingers. So I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. I had been erased, deliberately. That evening, I sat across from Mom at the kitchen table. She was sipping red wine, flipping through a home design catalog, like it was any other Tuesday. "Did Grandma leave me the house?" I asked plainly. She didn't look up. "Jade takes good care of it." "That's not what I asked." She paused, exhaled through her nose, and finally met my eyes. "I didn't want you to get your hopes up. You were always too sensitive for that kind of responsibility." "You mean too sensitive to be manipulated?" Her lips thinned. "You're being dramatic." That was the moment. The snap. The Giot Nuok Tren Lai. I stood up. "You let her take everything, and you helped." She looked wounded, but not remorseful. "You have a roof over your head. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said. "Not anymore." I didn't sleep that night. I reread every page of the letter, every clause, every signature. Then I emailed a lawyer. There's something strange about walking into a building you were supposed to own, only to knock on the door like a stranger. The brownstone on Elgin Street looked even more beautiful than I remembered. The new paint gleamed ivory under the spring sun, with brass house numbers that shimmered like polished metals. Jade had turned the front yard into a Pinterest-perfect garden, hydrangeas and ferns in matching white ceramic pots. But something about it felt fake, sterile, too controlled. I stood outside for a solid minute before ringing the bell. I hadn't told her I was coming. Inside, I heard footsteps, heels, fast, then halting. The door cracked open. Her expression went from confusion to performance in half a second. "Kaylin! Wow! You just pop up now, huh?" Her voice was smooth, cheerful, but her eyes were already calculating. "I need to talk," I said flatly. "About Grandma." She held the door open, slowly, a reluctant hostess. "Fine! Come in. But I have a Zoom in 20. The air inside smelled like lavender and new furniture. Her furniture. The walls were painted a tasteful beige, decorated with black and white photos from her travels. Santorini, Paris, Tokyo. All places I'd never been. There wasn't a single picture of Grandma. Jade led me to the kitchen, poured herself lemon water, didn't offer me anything. She leaned against the counter like she was on the cover of Architectural Digest. "You've been busy," I said, gesturing to the renovations. She sipped. "I like order. Unlike you, I don't thrive in chaos." I didn't rise to it. "Grandma left this house to me." Her glass paused midair. I laid the envelope on the island between us, the one I'd found in the basement. The original letter, untouched. She stared at it. "Where did you get that?" "Where you didn't look hard enough." Her smile faded, replaced with something sharper. "Kaylin, do you have any idea how much work I've put into keeping this house from being foreclosed after Mom mismanaged the taxes?" I read the trust. Taxes were paid off. Grandma set aside a fund. Her voice dropped half an octave. "Then you don't know the full story." "No," I said, "but I'm starting to." She walked away from the kitchen island and stared out the window, like the garden would rescue her. "I lived here because I had to," she said quietly. You would have wrecked this place. You don't have the discipline. Don't turn this into a character assessment, I snapped. It's legal theft. She turned back, folding her arms. You really want to fight this? You think the court will believe the granola little sister over the corporate professional who's been holding this family together? My fists clenched. It's not about belief. It's about facts. For the first time, her mask cracked. Just a flicker. Doubt, maybe. Or fear. Get a lawyer then, she said, but be ready to lose everything else. That night, I called Brandon. I need help, I told him. Real help. He didn't ask questions, just said, come over. His apartment was messy, lived in, safe. He handed me tea and a blanket and let me sit in silence for a while before speaking. She's scared, you know. I looked up. How do you figure? Because she didn't deny it. She challenged you to fight. He pulled a manila folder from under his couch cushion and set it on the table. I started researching last week. I didn't know if I should show you yet. Inside were documents, financial records, emails from a renovation contractor, timestamps. She filed ownership with the city a year ago under your mom's name, but the power of attorney expired. It was fraud. I blinked. How did you even get these? I'm thorough, he said, smiling gently. That weekend, I met with a lawyer named Rena, recommended by Ms. Horvath. She was sharp, efficient, wore navy suits, and always double-checked her facts. After reading everything I had, she closed the folder and said, You have a case, a strong one, but it'll get ugly. I don't care, I said. I just want truth on paper. She raised a brow. You sure this isn't about revenge? I paused, then answered honestly, It's about not being erased. 2 days later, Jade showed up at my apartment. Unannounced. She never did that. She stood in my doorway, wearing oversized sunglasses and a coat too expensive for spring. Let's talk, she said. I let her in. She walked around the room, inspecting, judging. Her eyes fell on the family tree drawing I'd framed and hung near my bookshelf. She scoffed. Really? You're leaning into that whole Elwood legacy thing now? I'm reclaiming it. She sat down, uninvited. Look, if this is about money, I can write you a check. You want 20 grand? 30? I stared at her. She shrugged. You were never going to use that house anyway. No, I said quietly. You were never going to let me. She tried bargaining, gaslighting, even guilt. Mom's been a wreck, you know. She feels caught in the middle. She put herself there, I said. She's your mother. She's your enabler. Jade stood up, grabbed her purse. Fine, let's go to war. But just so you know, if you drag this into court, you're not just burning bridges. You're torching the whole bloodline. She walked out, slamming the door. I didn't chase her. I sat down, and I smiled. The morning after Jade's attempted bribe, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful, muted. Like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the half-burned cinnamon candle, the one I always lit when I needed to feel grounded. But it didn't smell like anything that day. Or maybe I'd just gone numb again. Across from me, the letter from Grandma lay unfolded. The edges were starting to curl. I'd read it so many times now, I could recite every word. To my Kaylin, who sees truth in silence. That line had stopped me the first time. Now it kept me going. My phone buzzed. Rena. Meeting confirmed. Thursday, 2 p.m. Probate filing will be initiated. I stared at the text for a long second, then typed back. Thank you. Let's do it. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. But there's a thin line between those two when the world keeps asking you to forget who you are. Brandon called later that day. Did she really offer you money? He asked, half in disbelief, half in awe. She did, I said. She thought 30 grand would be enough to undo years of theft. There was silence on the other end. Then, that house is worth 10 times that. She was trying to insult you and pay you off in the same move. I know, I said, and I almost took it. Why didn't you? I exhaled. Because if I did, I'd still be erasing myself. And this time, I'd be helping her do it. Rena and I filed the paperwork that Thursday. The clerk barely looked at me as I slid the documents across the counter, but it didn't matter. The stamp hit the paper with a satisfying thud, and just like that, my name was officially on record. My hands trembled as we walked out of the courthouse. You did well, Rena said. Now we wait for the challenge period. If she contests it, things get complicated. She will, I said. She doesn't know how not to fight. Rena didn't smile. Then we'll be ready. The next few days blurred. I kept my routine. Woke up, went to work, answered emails, watered my plants. But beneath it all ran a current of tension I couldn't shake. Then, one afternoon, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. I listened to it 3 times before it fully sank in. Kaylin, this is Trevor, the building manager at Elgin Street. I don't know what's going on, but your sister had some guys remove a bunch of stuff from the attic this morning. Looked like documents. Some boxes with your name on them. I figured I should call you. Hope you're okay. My blood ran cold. I called him back immediately. What exactly did they take? Didn't get a close look, but one of the boxes had those old photo albums from the top floor closet. Pretty sure they were yours. I hung up and grabbed my keys. The front gate to the brownstone was unlocked. Of course it was. I stepped inside. The house was empty, but not silent. Somewhere upstairs, a fan hummed, the steady whirl of something running behind the scenes. The place looked off, like a stage set that hadn't been struck properly. The air smelled faintly of bleach. Some of the photos were missing from the walls. A lamp was gone, a rug too. I headed to the attic staircase. The narrow wooden steps creaked just like they used to when I was a kid, sneaking up to read under the rafters. The attic was bare. Everything, Grandma's boxes, my baby books, the embroidered quilt she made me when I was 6, was gone. I stood in the middle of the empty floorboards and felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was fury. I drove straight to Jade's apartment. She opened the door with perfect mascara and an untouched cup of coffee in her hand, as if she were expecting a magazine shoot. You had no right, I said. She didn't ask what I meant. They were old. You weren't even using them. They weren't yours. They were in my house. I stepped inside without waiting for permission. This is going to court, I said. And I swear to God, Jade, if I find out you destroyed even one piece of that attic. Kaylin, she said sharply, voice dropping. You're spiraling again. This obsession with the past? It's unhealthy. I stared at her. Don't psychoanalyze me like you're not the one stealing identities. She laughed bitterly. Do you honestly believe you're better than me? No, I said, voice steady. But I'm real. That's more than I can say for you. That night, I went through my email history. Years of messages, invitations I never received, photos I was cropped out of. It was like watching my own life shrink in real time. I printed out every file and started a binder. Rena said we needed to prove not just theft, but pattern, systemic exclusion, emotional manipulation tied to material actions. It wasn't hard. Jade had built the case herself. One passive-aggressive comment, one deleted email, one ghosted invite at a time. But what broke me came 3 nights later. Mom called. I heard you're going through with it, she said. No greeting. Yes. Long pause. You really want to tear this family apart? I closed my eyes. It was already torn. I'm just picking up the pieces. You always did dramatize everything. And you always did pretend neutrality wasn't a choice. There was silence. Then a soft, broken line. I don't know how to fix this. I didn't answer right away. Then quietly, you don't need to fix it. Just don't stop me from fixing it for myself. She hung up. And for once I didn't cry. The invitation came on cream cardstock, gold embossed lettering spelling out a celebration of love, in calligraphy so polished it made my stomach turn. Jade was getting engaged. Or maybe she had been for weeks. Either way, the party was scheduled for Sunday evening, in the ballroom of a boutique hotel downtown, where the walls were velvet and every cocktail had a name you couldn't pronounce on the first try. The envelope hadn't come from her directly. It had arrived from Brandon. Tucked inside was a note, handwritten on plain paper. "I think this is your moment." That was all it said. But it was enough. I hadn't seen him in 2 weeks. Since the attic incident, everything between us had quieted. Not by choice. Just tension, maybe. The kind that grows in the spaces between decisions you're about to make, and ones you can't undo. I held the invitation in both hands for a long time. And then, I RSVP'd, yes. I arrived late enough that the room was already buzzing, but early enough that the crowd hadn't yet grown thick with alcohol. The walls glowed in warm amber, chandeliers casting soft shadows. Waiters moved like clockwork, trays of smoked salmon crostini and champagne flutes passing through hands too manicured to stain. Everyone was beautiful, perfect. So curated it hurt. And there, in the center, stood Jade. She was radiant, not just in the way she looked, but in the way people saw her. Their faces lit up when she spoke. Their posture shifted in her orbit. She wore a pale green silk gown that hugged her body like it had been designed around her soul. Brandon stood beside her, dark blue suit tailored to perfection, hand resting lightly on the small of her back. If you didn't know them, you'd believe everything. She spotted me, and for a split second, her smile cracked. "Kaylin," she said, gliding toward me with the practiced grace of someone who always controlled the narrative. "So glad you could make it." I nodded once. "You clean up nice," she added, eyes scanning my outfit like a measuring tape. I didn't respond. She led me into the main hall, introducing me to people I'd never seen before and would never meet again. Each time, she used the same line. "This is my sister, the artist. She lives off the grid a bit, but we love her eccentricity." The room laughed politely. Brandon didn't laugh. An hour in, the toasts began. People took turns sharing stories of love, loyalty, and how perfect the couple seemed. Words like soulmates and meant to be echoed against the ceiling like scripted lines. Then Jade took the mic. Her voice was clear, smooth as silk. "Thank you, everyone, for being here. It means the world. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone really important to me." She turned toward me. "My sister, Kaylin. Some of you know we've had our colorful moments. She's a bit of a lone wolf, but she's got a good heart." A soft chuckle rippled through the crowd. She's always been the creative one, marches to her own beat. And sometimes that beat sounds like conspiracy theories and late-night rants about injustice. Laughter. I stared at her. "But honestly," Jade continued, "every family has their wild card. Ours just happens to come with a flair for drama." More laughter. I didn't move. Brandon looked at me. Just once. A brief flicker of apology in his eyes. That was all I needed. I stepped forward. "Mind if I say something?" Jade hesitated, microphone still in hand. "Of course," she said, but her voice had lost its sheen. I took the mic. The room went quiet. "I just want to thank Jade," I began, "because she's absolutely right. Every family does have a wild card." A few nervous chuckles. "But some wild cards are just the truth you didn't want to draw." I turned slightly, scanning the room. "Most of you don't know me. That's not your fault. My sister prefers to keep me out of the picture. Literally." I pulled a folded envelope from my purse, held it up. "This is the original trust from our grandmother. It names me, and only me, as the legal heir to the Elgin Street property. Jade has been living there illegally for over a year." A collective gasp. Murmurs swelled. "She changed the locks. She removed my belongings. She offered me hush money to stay quiet. And she's about to face charges for fraudulent transfer of property." Jade stepped forward. "You're lying." I turned to her. "I have witnesses. I have signatures. I have a lawyer. You want to keep talking?" The silence was total now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Brandon walked toward me. "I told her to tell the truth," he said quietly. "She didn't." Jade looked at him, stunned. "You knew?" He nodded. "And you still planned this party?" He looked around the room. "I wanted everyone to see her. The real her, not the one from Instagram, not the version she feeds you." He looked at me again. "You did the hard part. I just gave you the mic." I handed it back to him, and then I walked out. Outside, the air was sharp and cool. I could still hear the murmurs behind the glass walls. The fracture of illusion. I didn't feel victorious. I felt real. The day after the engagement party, I didn't wake up with a sense of triumph. I woke up exhausted. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't read, most from numbers I didn't recognize. Some were condolences disguised as sympathy. Others were thinly veiled attacks wrapped in passive-aggressive bows. Jade's followers, her orbit, her loyal believers. I powered off the phone, dropped it face down, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I felt weightless. Not free exactly, but unburdened. By the end of that week, I'd moved out of my apartment. It wasn't dramatic. No middle fingers thrown in the air. No declarations on social media. I just packed the essentials, left the key in an envelope with my name written once in lowercase, and took the train upstate. I stayed at a small cabin that belonged to a friend of a friend. Off-grid. Not in a fantasy survivalist way, but in the way that made Wi-Fi feel like a foreign concept and silence less threatening. There was no television. No mirrors bigger than a postcard. Just books, creaking wood floors, and a stovetop that hissed before it came to life. I slept for almost 2 days. When I finally stepped outside into the cold morning air, the world was still turning without me. And that was a relief. For 3 weeks, I barely spoke. Not because I was broken, but because I had nothing left to prove. I walked through woods, wrote in a journal I didn't intend to keep, lit a fire each night and let the embers speak for me. Sometimes I'd whisper to the trees, not expecting an answer, just to hear my voice in the wild again. Once, I saw a fox. It didn't run, just stood across the frozen creek, watching me. I raised my hand slowly, not to wave, but in acknowledgement. That was the only time I cried. When I returned to the city, spring had started to thaw the sidewalks. The air was still sharp, but it carried the kind of promise I hadn't believed in for a long time. I didn't go back to my old apartment. Instead, I signed the lease on a small storefront space in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked. It had old brick walls, mismatched floorboards, and a window just big enough to write something in chalk on. I called it the Quiet House. Not a bookstore, not a cafe, a space for listening. I didn't post anything online for a month. Then, one morning, I took a photo of the shop window. Nothing inside yet. Just the empty room and the words I'd written with chalk across the glass. "Come in when you're ready. You don't have to speak." The post got 30 likes, then 300, then 3,000. By the end of the week, it had gone semi-viral on a subreddit for healing spaces. People began asking questions. Some messaged me. Some just commented a single word. Needed. That was enough. One afternoon, about 2 months after the party, I was restocking a shelf with hand-bound notebooks when I heard the bell above the door ring. I looked up. My mother stood there, holding a small white envelope. Her coat looked too heavy for the weather. Her makeup was subtle, like she wanted to be invisible and seen all at once. "I didn't know if I should come," she said. I nodded once, gestured to the little chair by the front window. She sat. We didn't speak right away. After a while, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Long. Written in cursive. "I didn't come to argue," she said. "I came to say I'm sorry. For being quiet when I should have screamed. For treating your truth like a phase. For letting her rewrite history and pretending not to see." I watched her hands tremble as she held out the letter. I didn't take it. Instead, I asked quietly, "What do you want from me now?" She swallowed hard. "Nothing." That was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. "I'm glad you came," I said. And I meant it. That night, I read the letter. She didn't make excuses. She remembered moments I thought she'd forgotten. She admitted she'd believed Jade because it was easier to love a mask than face her own reflection in me. I cried, but not for her. For me. For the little girl who stopped showing poems at the dinner table because silence got fewer bruises. A week later, a box arrived at the shop. No name. No return address. Inside were my old baby books, photo albums, and the embroidered quilt from Grandma. The attic boxes. I don't know if it was Jade, but it wasn't for her anymore. It was mine. I framed one of the photos from the box. It was of me and Grandma, sitting under the porch swing. She was holding my hand, her eyes soft and firm. I put it near the register. Underneath, I wrote a single sentence. She gave me this house without knowing I'd build something bigger. It started with a reservation. An email from Jade. No subject line. Just a forwarded open table confirmation for a place in the West Village. A tea room that looked like something out of a European travel magazine. High ceilings, crown molding, and porcelain cups so delicate they could fracture under breath. No message. Just the booking. It came 6 days after the box arrived. I didn't respond, but I showed up. Because some endings don't wait for invitations. The hostess led me to the back patio, a glass-covered courtyard blooming with hanging ivy, and an overpriced attempt at serenity. Jade was already there. Perfect posture, camel trench coat draped over her chair. Fingers wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. She didn't stand when I arrived. "I ordered your favorite," she said. "Earl Grey, no sugar." I sat, looked her straight in the eyes. She glanced around, then leaned forward slightly. "I thought we should talk, one last time." "Talk or control the narrative, one last time?" I asked. Her jaw twitched, but she didn't rise to it. "Look," she said, "I messed up. I crossed lines I can't uncross. I made choices you'll never forgive." Silence. "I'm not going to ask you to," she added. The waiter came. I ordered nothing. The teacup sat between us like a truce neither of us believed in. Jade folded her hands. "Do you want to know why I did it?" "No," I said, "but I think you're going to tell me anyway." She blinked, then nodded. "Because you were always the one Mom loved quietly. I was the one she performed with. She dressed me up, took me to galas, clapped for my shows. But you, she saved her softness for you, her guilt, her real." I didn't respond. "I resented that," she continued. "But I didn't know how to ask for it. So I took what I could. Attention, control, the house. I told myself it was all for order, that I was protecting the family. But truth is," she looked down at her hands, bare now. No rings, no polish. "I just didn't want to be invisible." The irony tasted like metal. "That's funny," I said quietly, "because that's exactly what you made me." She didn't flinch. For once, she didn't have a comeback. We sat in that stillness for a while. Wind pressed against the glass ceiling. Cutlery clinked from the front dining room. Our world was a bubble inside a bubble, silent, fragile. Finally, I reached into my coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo, me and Grandma on the porch swing, one Jade had never seen. I placed it on the table. "I'm not coming back," I said. "Not as a sister, not as a secret, not as a scapegoat." She stared at the photo. "I figured," she whispered. "This isn't revenge," I added. "It's release." She looked up at me. "And what do you want from me now?" "Nothing," I said, then stood, which for once is a gift. I didn't turn back when I walked out, didn't check if she cried, or drank the tea, or tore the photo. That was her weight to carry. Mine had already lifted. 2 weeks later, I hosted my first community circle at the Quiet House. 15 people showed up, some strangers, some familiar usernames from online. Each one walked in with something unspoken stitched into their shoulders. I brewed tea, passed out journals, played soft piano through a speaker I'd borrowed from a neighbor. No one had to talk, but eventually they did. A woman in her 50s spoke about her sister stealing her child's college fund. A teenager talked about growing up in a home where truth was punished and silence was rewarded. A man with a tattooed hand admitted he hadn't spoken to his father in 12 years. No one offered advice. No one tried to fix anyone. We just sat in the same room, with our scars in plain sight, and gave each other the permission to keep breathing. That's when I realized I hadn't burned the bridge. I'd built a new one they could cross with me. Spring in Brooklyn has its own kind of rhythm, not the blooming for Instagram kind, the kind that sneaks up on you. One day you step outside and notice the tree on your street has buds again. A shopkeeper leaves their door propped open. The cold isn't gone, but it's less convincing. It had been 3 months since the tea room. 2 months since the quiet house had started welcoming people, not just into a room, but into the soft tension of being seen without having to explain. I stopped calling it a business. It was something else, a living thing. People brought with them journals, old letters, griefs in boxes. They came with silence that had curdled, and silence that still asked for permission. We didn't rush them. We didn't give them 12-step slogans or laminated affirmations. We just held space. That was all some people needed. One day, a woman came in and placed a small clay pot on the window ledge. "It's not much," she said, "but I needed somewhere to let it grow." It was a sage plant, barely rooted. The soil shook when she breathed near it. We watered it every morning. Sometimes people sat by it, not to talk to it, just to know something was growing, even when they couldn't see it happen. I kept a notebook behind the register, not for inventory, for names, not full names, just initials, moments, things people whispered on their way out. M.A. I stood up to him. I shook the whole room. C.J. I threw the necklace in the river. It didn't make me clean, but it made me start. VR. I'm not healed, but I'm not hiding. I never showed it to anyone. I just needed to know that some silences were being rewritten. One afternoon, I got a letter. A real one. With a stamp and everything. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address wasn't. It was from Brandon. I hadn't heard from him since the party. He'd disappeared. Not in a dramatic way, just in the way people do when they know they've done what they were meant to, and they don't want to rewrite the story with more than what's needed. Inside was a short note. "Kaylin, I didn't disappear. I stepped back. You were never a rescue mission. You were always the storm, the beautiful kind, the one that clears the air." I still think about that night, about how quiet the room got when you spoke. That was the loudest moment I've ever seen. Stay loud, even when you whisper. B. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of the notebook. Did I cry? No. But I stood there for a long time with my hand on the page, breathing slower than usual. 2 weeks later, I spoke publicly for the first time. A local community center had asked if I'd be willing to share a bit of my story. Not the drama, not the court case, not the headlines that still floated around in gossip corners. Just the truth. I almost said no. Then I remembered what it felt like to be misquoted in my own home, to be labeled the weird little sister, in a voice that never asked what I wanted to be called. So I said yes. There were maybe 30 people in the room, no stage, no podium, just folding chairs, uneven floorboards, and a mic that whined when I first touched it. I didn't prepare a speech. I started with a story about a family tree drawn in crayon, one with a missing name, and how I used to think that made me the mistake, about a porch swing and a grandmother who saw me fully before I learned how to hide, about silence that calcifies if you feed it long enough, about how I stopped feeding mine, about how sometimes the greatest revenge isn't fire, it's freedom. At the end, someone raised their hand. What do you tell someone who's still stuck, who hasn't had their moment yet? I paused, then said quietly, "You're not behind. You're not broken. You're just not finished." Now and then, people leave notes at the quiet house, folded scraps, scribbled poems, even burned pages with the edges still charred. We don't read them aloud. We just place them in the box near the front. We call it the archive, not of pain, but of survival. Sometimes I sit there late at night when the place is empty. I read through a few lines, just enough to remind myself that this wasn't just about me. It never was. I think that's what Jade never understood. Some people build mirrors, others build windows. I chose the latter. One evening, as I locked up, I noticed something in the corner of the window. The sage plant had sprouted its first new leaf. It was small, soft, but steady. Sometimes, it's not the loudest scream, but the quietest truth that changes everything. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's this. You don't have to burn bridges to walk away. You don't have to win every fight to reclaim your peace. What you do need is the courage to tell your story, even if your voice trembles. So let me ask you, have you ever been the invisible one in your own family? What would it take for you to step out of that shadow? If this story touched something in you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're from or what part of this hit home. And hey, if you didn't like it, let me know why. I want to hear your story too. If you want more stories like this, ones that go beyond the drama and dig into what really matters, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep growing together.